And that should be it for housekeeping. So I am going to let this person in who just came in, and I will go on to an update for MLSA. And I saw a lot of you very recently at our region meetings. So, you know, I don't need to go into too much detail, but some good things. We just had a official announcement that the MyCore contract has been approved, and we're very excited. So we just had a meeting yesterday with Eagle and MSU and the Huron River Watershed Council, and we're working together to get the program started again. So if you are eager to get started with the MyCore program with your cooperative lakes monitoring, just hold on, just hang tight, because we're going to be working on that and have that information out in January for signing up, and we'll have more information about training, because training may look different this year. So we, you know, we have all of that coming up, and there's going to be some really cool things that will be updated as far as data collection. So we're really looking forward to some very exciting changes in that program. Also, you may have seen that your Riparian magazine came out this week. If it has not reached you yet, it will reach you anytime now. They should all go out this week, and I have started a new thing where we now have a newsletter that will go out with the magazine that is sort of a companion to the magazine and has further resources and information for you. So that went out on Tuesday. I had actually planned for that not to even go out until tomorrow, but the magazine got out faster than I thought. So I sent it out early so that people would have it. So there's some really interesting resources in there, including an article from 2011 from the Riparian, where we also talked about Sanford Lake and their situation well ahead of when you know, the dam issue occurred this year. So lots of good stuff there. And next year, 2021 will be our 60th anniversary. So I'm looking forward to that milestone, and we're gonna, you know, try to mark the occasion one way or another, hopefully at our conference, however that looks. So we're still hoping that our conference is, well, not hoping, we're still planning our conference for the end of April, beginning of May. So keep those dates in mind, and as time goes, we will be rolling out more information about what that will look like and what we will offer for that. We have a few board members with us tonight. Is there anything that I missed, gentlemen? We have Mike, we have John. John is our vice president. Mike is our treasurer. Paul is a director. So if there's anything you would like to add, that's great. Otherwise, we will take it away.
All right. Sounds like silence is golden from the board there. But like Missy said, jump in with questions. You can chat them as well. We'll try to monitor that too. But let's jump right in and welcome Jo Latimore again from the Michigan State University Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, the academic specialist. She is a frequent partner and guest of MLSA. So I've seen her present. I've been to one of her seminars. So I'm excited to have you here, Jo. So thanks. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Craig. Let's see, I am trying to share my screen right now. It's telling me I'm paused, which is strange.
It says you have started.
Ah, hold on.
But I don't see anything.
Let's just click there. Did that work? Let me see, that is a new thing for me. Resume share. Because I like to show pretty pictures when I talk to people. Let me try something new. How about that?
There we go.
There it is.
Does that look right? Just the slide, nothing else?
Yep.
All right, great. All right, so yeah, thanks for inviting me, Craig. It's always great to have a chance to come out and talk with folks, even if it's through Zoom and not face-to-face like we'd probably prefer to do it. But this gives us a chance to get together and maybe have a little more flexibility in it too. You know, I live in Traverse City, even though I work for MSU. So, you know, traveling down to Southwest Michigan is sometimes a challenge. And so this made it easy for me. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes through a few slides about aquatic invasive species and, you know, try and touch on some of the new and emerging issues and projects and things that are going on. But as Craig mentioned, I want to provide plenty of time for folks to ask questions or, you know, raise issues or concerns that you have with me. I don't have all the answers. In particular, I'll start out right away saying I am not an expert on various herbicides and which herbicides are better for which treatments. I know a little bit, but you know, not enough to be an answer for questions specifically about specific herbicides in most cases. But there's a lot of other things that go into aquatic invasive species, and we'll talk about that in the next few minutes. So, you know, y'all are familiar with the issues of aquatic invasive species, right? And our various lakes are impacted or safe from different invasive species. It kind of depends on which lake you're in and which part of the state and how busy it is and so forth. But, you know, we've seen this, even if our own lake doesn't look like this, we've seen issues like this in other lakes, and where we see, you know, zebra mussels in great numbers, or we see a non-native plant growing out of control across a water body, and we see the problems that can cause. So, you know, we all are, I know, working hard to be vigilant about invasive species and may be faced with managing them in our own lakes. So, you know, this is not new. But I do like to, you know, kind of remind folks of the definition of invasive species, because sometimes the terminology, people use different words, even in our own programs at the state of Michigan and at Michigan State, we use different terms. So, you know, these words are often used interchangeably: invasive, introduced, non-native, exotic, you know, those kinds of things. Invasive actually has a very specific definition. So something that's introduced or non-native or exotic, as you see at the top there, those are plants or animals that are found beyond their natural range. If they're not native to the lake that they're found in, for example, or the forest or the grassland that they're found in. Invasive means it's not only non-native, but their introduction causes or is likely to cause harm. And that harm can be environmental, it can be economic, it can be harm to human health. So, you know, an invasive species is something worse than just being non-native. You know, I might plant a non-native flower in my garden. That doesn't mean it's invasive, but if that plant takes over and, you know, is poisonous to the native wildlife, for example, that's causing environmental harm, and then it becomes an invasive species. So that's what we mean when we talk about an invasive species. It's a very specific term. I also like to start with a little bit of information about aquatic plants. Aquatic plants are not, by definition, invasive. We need our aquatic plants. They're really important to our lakes and our streams and our wetlands. And a healthy lake has a healthy community of aquatic plants. And I've listed here on the screen a number of the benefits that native aquatic plants can provide. And I know sometimes they can feel weedy, right? They can grow aggressively, and it seems like every year, it's my experience, because I work with lakes all over the state of Michigan, I find that every year there seems to be like a plant of the year, a plant that I get lots of phone calls about. And it doesn't necessarily have to be invasive. In fact, usually it isn't. There was a native buttercup that this spring I was getting so many phone calls about, because people hadn't seen it before, and they were very concerned that they might have a new invasive. And that's great. I encourage you to call and reach out to MSU or to the DNR or to Eagle if you find something that you're not sure what it is. Because we'd rather be safe than sorry, right? It just was this spring, these buttercups were really happy with the water temperatures, with the rain levels, with the sunlight. They were happy. They were growing where people hadn't really noticed them before. We're glad people are noticing things. Our native aquatic plants, they protect our shorelines. They keep the sediment in place instead of making our lakes get all muddy every time a boat goes through or a windy day happens. They provide habitat. They photosynthesize, so they're producing oxygen that the other things that live in the lake need. They manage the nutrients in your lake. If you don't have aquatic plants in your lake, something else is going to use those nutrients. And usually that's algae that we don't want. And then they help with water quality. They help with the beauty of the lake. You know, these beautiful scenes of a healthy lake typically involve plants of some kind, like this background photo that I have. And they can also help prevent the invasion of invasive species. If you have a healthy native plant community, there's not going to be any open space for an invasive plant to take hold, or there's going to be less space. So keeping your native plants healthy is a layer of protection for your lake against invasives. So what can we do? And I know this is kind of a busy graph, but it gets to the whole kind of structure of the rest of my talk. And what I like to talk about first is preventing invasive species in the first place. And if you look over on the left-hand side of this graph, you know, prevention is when you don't have invasive species. And that's where you're in a good shape, right? You still have to do things. You have to take prevention actions to keep yourself that way. But as we move to the right over time, when we get a few invasive species in, we still have a chance for some early detection. We can find these species early before they grow out of control. We find them early, we have a much better chance of controlling them, or maybe eradicating them altogether and getting rid of them. And it'd be like they were never there. And that's you know, kind of ideal situation. If we do get invasive species, we want to find it early. And we want to respond to it quickly, because as we move through time, you can see you go from prevention to eradication to containment, and finally to just asset-based protection, which means basically we're just going to keep our boating lanes open. We can't, you know, we can't get rid of these weeds. They're out of control. We're at least going to keep it so we can get our boats in and out of the shore. But that's about all we can do. We don't want to get to that point. We want to be down here in the prevention, and if necessary, maybe some eradication. So I'm going to talk about prevention first, a bit about early detection, and then about rapid responses to invaders. So being able to prevent invasive species really focuses on understanding how they get there in the first place, the pathways. So they spread through a number of ways, and primarily it's by us, right? By recreational boating, right? Within our inland lakes. They get to the Great Lakes primarily through shipping. That's how it's happened over and over again. It's happening a lot less frequently now because of safeguards in place with, you know, ocean-going ships and ships that move through the Great Lakes system. But once they're here in the Great Lakes, then it tends to be recreational boating that's moving a lot of these invasive species around. But that's not the only pathway. That's the only way not the only way we humans are moving aquatics around. We also like our ornamental ponds. We like to have aquariums that may have plants or crayfish or fish that aren't native to the area. And if those get released into natural lakes, those can become invasive as well. I'm sure many of you have seen pictures of goldfish thriving in small lakes. And then habitat alteration, that can happen too. When we're doing shoreline construction, managing a dam, bringing in big equipment that may have been in a lake with an invasive species before, and then it comes to our lake, it may bring things with it. So keeping that equipment clean is really important as well. I often get questions about the spread by birds. People say, oh, why are we working so hard to protect our lakes by cleaning our boats and, you know, washing our waders and being worried about live bait when birds are just going to move them around? There's been a fair amount of research at this point about birds. And of course, yes, they can spread invasive species, but it's a lot more rare, far more rare than humans spreading them. And even anecdotally, what we know just from being out in a lot of lakes, a lot of times, when we usually find a new invasion, it's usually at a boat ramp. And I'm pretty sure the birds aren't using the boat ramp to come into the lake. So, you know, we know that although birds can do it, they're not the primary way that things move around. So clean, drain, and dry. This is a message that isn't new to you. You've heard this before, how vitally important it is for boats and boating equipment, trailers, fishing gear, any gear or equipment that's moving from one water body to the next needs to be clean of invasive species. And so there's a lot of good supporting information and programs out there for lakes to help get this message out. It's an exciting new development is that Michigan State University is working hard right now with assistance from MLSA and other partners to revitalize Michigan's Clean Boats, Clean Waters program. That's going to include new educational materials, new signage, a new website, which is actually already up and running, and a small grants program that we're really excited about. Wisconsin has had a lot of success offering small grants to lake associations and other community groups to do educational activities, to put up signs, to get materials in the hands of boaters. And so starting this next year, we're going to be offering small grants in partnership with Eagle to lake associations and community groups to support their Clean Boats, Clean Waters efforts. So we're really excited about that. We're also hoping to be able to resume our mobile boat wash program through MSU, where we partner, and we've partnered with some of the lakes in your region for sure on these events, where we bring a mobile boat washing unit to boat ramps and do educational events with folks as they come and go. There's also a research project going on right now between Eagle and MSU. We had an intern this summer who worked very hard on a project comparing different kinds of boat washing stations, mobile stations, hot water stations, permanent stations, on how effective they are, how expensive they are, where they work, where they don't. That report and article is almost finished and will be submitted to an academic journal, and we'll also be writing a companion article for the Riparian magazine about our findings. So we're really excited about that. Maria Bleitz, who is our intern on that, was able to present on that at the Inland Lakes Partnership Convention a few weeks ago. So there'll be a recording of her presentation on the convention website too. You may also be aware that relatively new, the boating laws changed. This was effective last spring, but it's still, you know, we're in that educational phase of it this year too, is letting people know that it is unlawful to launch a watercraft or to drive away with a watercraft that has any plants or animals attached to it. That's actually illegal in Michigan now. It used to be that you just couldn't launch a boat with plants attached to it or other organisms. Now you also can't be driving down the road with it like that. You also have to drain any water. You can't transport water from one lake to another. And that includes in your cooler and your bait bucket and so forth. And also, it was illegal before, it's illegal still to release unused live bait into the water. And so, you know, education is really important on this. You know, when we work with boaters all around the state, by and large, they want to do the right thing. They're just not sure what the right thing is. They may have heard mixed messages. They may have heard that it's a lost cause, invasives are everywhere. And so, you know, letting people know that no, invasives aren't everywhere. And even if a lake has an invasive species, there's another one waiting to get in, and there's still a lot of value in preventing their spread. There's also a very successful program in the state that started a few years ago with a graduate student who was working with me, Ripple, Reduce Invasive Pet and Plant Escapes. And this program focuses on those ponds, those aquariums, those ornamental aquatics or pets that you might have, or members of the family might have, or classrooms might have. A lot of classrooms have aquariums. So we've been working with pet shops, with garden centers, with schools and science teachers and classrooms on how to safely dispose of unwanted aquatic plants and animals so they don't get into our waterways. So there's a lot of great resources available about this program too. And for some of these programs that I'm mentioning, I'll say this now at the end of my presentation, I've got the names of them, and I shared with Craig the links to all of them, and I'll try and put those in the chat before I sign out too, so you can visit those websites if you wish. And I mentioned also another prevention opportunity is keeping our healthy native plants healthy in our lakes. If we have healthy natural shorelines as much as possible, if we let native plants thrive in our lakes, they will help protect our lakes from invasive species getting in. That's prevention. Now early detection, being able to actually find invasive species if they get into your lake. There's a lot of really good resources out there. This is the state of Michigan's watch list of aquatic invasive plants. These are plants that are either new-ish to Michigan or on our horizon, not here yet. And I'm going to talk about each of these, at least the plants individually, a little bit more, but this is a really great resource. And the nice thing about this watch list, not only is this an educational resource for people, and it's available on the state website, it's also a list of species that the state has resources to help combat. So if you find any of these plants growing in your lake, and notice Eurasian milfoil isn't on there, that one's been here long enough that it isn't a special concern plant at this point. There are resources at the state level for them to come in and help you get rid of it from your lake. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end here. Melissa already gave a great introduction or reminder of the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, our statewide volunteer lake monitoring program. We have an exotic aquatic plant watch that several of the lakes represented here have been active with over the years. It's a great way to learn and remember to go look for invasive plants. And we actually were able to offer it this year even without MyCorps being up and running, because we had some separate funding for that. So we still had 50 or more lakes around the state get involved with that program this year. And so if you're interested in more formally looking for invasive plants in your lake, this is a great way to get engaged. You can also report plants to MISSIN. This is the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. That's free for anyone. There's no enrollment, there's no signing up. Anyone can report any suspected invasive species into that system, which is available as an app on your phone, or you can go to the website. Their website actually has a lot of great informational materials and even quizzes to teach yourself how to learn to identify some of these invasive species. All right, so part of the important part of early detection is knowing what you're looking at. And so I'm just gonna highlight a few of the invaders that either will look familiar to you or maybe would be something for you to brush up on a little bit. Zebra mussels, of course, have been an issue in Michigan for a long time, and quagga mussels as well, particularly in the Great Lakes. If you go to Lake Michigan shoreline right now, it's unlikely you'll see zebra mussels. You're going to see quagga mussels. They've kind of replaced the zebra mussels. They're related. They're a little bigger and their shells are shaped a little differently. And we are starting to see some quagga mussels making their way into some of our inland lakes. For a long time, we would only see zebra mussels, and there was some hope that quagga mussels wouldn't do well in our inland lakes, but we know they're in Higgins Lake, and they're also in lakes that are closely attached to the Great Lakes. So these are things to still keep an eye out for, even though zebra mussels in many of our lakes, our inland lakes, have started to decline somewhat. To the next slide. My computer is going a little slow for a second here, so I'll wait a moment till I get to the next slide. It'll probably fly forward really quickly in a minute. You know how you get that thing spinning that tells you it's thinking really hard? That's where we're at. All right. Ooh, my PowerPoint just crashed, so bear with me. Sorry about that, folks. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I think it didn't like all my photos. While I'm bringing it up, does anybody have any questions for me at this point?
I do. You said that the zebra mussels are starting to disappear. How do you account for that?
That's a really good question. There's definitely a lot of researchers that are looking at that and trying to understand why. Warm temperatures in some cases seem to be one of the things that puts a lot of stress on zebra mussels. So as we've had some warm summers, I think that, you know, some people think that warmer lake temperatures has to do with some of the decline. Another thing that we often see with invasive species is that they become, they kind of crowd themselves out. They eat themselves out of house and home in some ways. And so, you know, a lot of people, when they look at where we have zebra mussels, they make the water a lot clearer because they're filter feeders and they eat the floating algae in the lakes. But once the lake is low in that algae, they might not have enough to eat, and they may be declining for that reason too. But there could be some other things going on too that we just aren't sure about yet. But we're definitely seeing things decline, which is interesting.
Thank you.
So Joe,
yeah.
Is there any information on float airplanes transferring invasive species from lake to lake?
Mm-hmm. They certainly can. It's just like anything else that moves from one water body to the next. They have that capacity, right, to move invasives. You know, the one good thing is that if they're moving from lake to lake, they're usually in the deeper water. You know, they're often in areas where they're not so likely to maybe snag on weeds or things like that. But, you know, their resident lake, if they're sitting in a lake and they're docked at a lake for a long time, mussels could attach, they could get into those shallows. So it's definitely a possibility. And I know that there have been some lakes that have said, yeah, we don't really want these float planes coming in because we don't know what they're bringing with them, or if they're taking steps to clean, drain, and dry them, just like a boater should.
Yeah, it's not easy to keep them off your lake.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. All right, I think
mean,
I'm
Western
back.
Michigan.
Am I back now, you guys? Or no?
Starting.
All right. It's acting very strange again. We're gonna try a different one. How about that? Are you seeing my milfoil?
We can see it.
Great. All right. I don't need to tell you all about milfoil. It's still a problem in Michigan. We're still concerned about it, but it's not a watch list species anymore because it's so abundant. But it's still something that we're concerned about. And we're particularly concerned about the hybrid milfoil, where we're seeing Eurasian watermilfoil and the native northern watermilfoil crossbreeding and creating a really difficult to control plant. And so there's ongoing research cooperative between MSU and Montana State University, where Ryan Thum is, who used to be at Grand Valley and started our hybrid milfoil genetics program. And we've been working with volunteers all over the state to collect samples of suspected hybrid milfoil to look at the genetics. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of different genetic types, and some are susceptible to some of our herbicides and some are not. So what we're learning from that is that it's really important to know what strains you're dealing with before you spend money on an herbicide treatment or other control measures, because we know that some it will be effective and for some it probably won't. And so it's exciting to be part of that research. It's unfortunate that Michigan is kind of a hotbed for hybrid milfoil right now, but we're learning a lot about it, and that will make us better prepared to manage it when it does occur. Curly leaf pondweed is another fairly established invader that we have, and in a lot of lakes it doesn't actually become that problematic. We're not really sure why that is, but when people find curly leaf pondweed that has these lasagna shaped leaves, we suggest that they keep an eye on it. And if it gets really thick, like you see in that background picture, then yeah, maybe some management is important. But no, in some other lakes, it tends to just become part of the community and doesn't really grow out of control. And if that's the case, then you're fortunate, and you don't just kind of keep an eye on it is all you really need to do. We're more concerned about starry stonewort, and I know that it's definitely hit a lot of lakes in Southwest Michigan, and it's continuing to march its way north. I just had a sample delivered to me on my front porch from a lake in Manistee County yesterday, and luckily that was not starry stonewort. It was a native relative of starry stonewort. So I was able to give them that good news. But starry stonewort can grow very thick mats. It's a macroalgae, so it doesn't have true roots or leaves or anything like that. But it grows very large as far as how tall it can get. Luckily, it has these distinctive but small star-shaped bulbils, these reproductive structures, that make it fairly easy to identify. They're not always present on the plant, and when they are present, they're on the underside, almost down in the sediments a little bit. So you have to dig in to find them typically, but it's aggressive, and we're still, again, learning how to treat it. It's not an easy one to beat, partly because it grows so thick that delivery of an herbicide, for example, can be ineffective because it can't get all the way through the mass of the algae. European frogbit is one I'm definitely going to spend a little time on because it's moving in Michigan, unfortunately. It's a really cute little plant. These leaves are like tiny lily pads, maybe the size of a quarter or a $1/2, with a little 3-petaled white flower. It doesn't root into the bottom. It just has roots that hang down into the water column as it floats on the surface. So where you usually find it is up against the shore where it's kind of washed in. And it'll create these very thick mats across the surface of the water and doesn't allow anything else to grow. And here's a map that shows frog bit distribution currently. If you focus on Michigan, these dark blue dots show that where it was initially, it was kind of isolated along the coast of Lake Huron and connecting waters, wetlands and such along the shore of Lake Huron. And so we thought, well, at least we know where it's at and we can control it. It was actually fairly recently, it was found up in Alpena, but still along Lake Huron. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, near the end of the year, had jumped over here, and we found it in Pentwater Lake. We found it at the mouth of the Grand River in Grand Haven. And then just this year, it's been found in areas around Washtenaw County and in the Waterloo State Game Area and other recreation areas in Michigan. So it's definitely moving, unfortunately. You see this other spot here in East Grand Rapids and in Reeds Lake and some connecting lakes there. So it's moving around. With the discovery in the state recreation areas, we think that, you know, we're doing a lot of outreach to waterfowl hunters because we fear that that might be one recreational use that's spreading it. And, you know, we've been focusing so much on anglers and maybe not as much on getting the word out about clean, drain, and dry to hunters that are using boats and decoys and having their dogs out there in the water and, you know, really getting in there in the water to make sure that they recognize frog bit and know how to keep their gear clean and report any suspicious plants that they see. So that's going on right now. And I know MLSA has been spreading the word about frog bit as well. So this is one to definitely keep an eye out for.
Hey, Joe, can I ask a question about that?
You bet.
What kind of conditions does that like?
Like I said, it doesn't root. So it likes calm waters or sheltered areas. We often will find it kind of pushed up against cattail beds and stuff, you know, it'll wash up there, and that makes it kind of hard to remove, because one of the management approaches is just to hand remove it because it's floating. And if you pick it up, it's all connected to one another. You can get these arm loads of frog bit in your arms. But if it gets up in among the cattail stems, that gets hard to get all of it. So those are the conditions it seems to like the most, is those kind of quiet backwater areas. It doesn't really care what the bottom is like because it doesn't root. So that doesn't seem to be a difference. And as we say with most plants, the more nutrients there are in a lake, the happier it's going to be.
Got it. Thanks.
Sure. All right, just a couple more to show you. Hydrilla. We don't have it in Michigan yet, and honestly, I don't know how we don't. It is such an aggressive plant, and it grows really quickly, and it's a long, ropey plant that it's so easy to get tangled on propellers and trailer axles and that kind of thing. I think it's really a matter of when. So, you know, this is, you know, if you've heard me talk for years, you've heard me talk about no hydrilla, no to report it. I still think we're going to get it at some point. It's in all the other Great Lakes states. And so this one looks a lot like some of our native plants, but look at those toothy leaves that it has. Those teeth are really important characteristic, and it will even have teeth, even though it's hard to see. It'll have teeth on this mid vein on the underside of the leaves too. So definitely keep an eye out for hydrilla. And then I'm going to end with a couple of plants that aren't actually, they're actually more from the ornamental trade. Water hyacinth here that you can see with its beautiful purple flowers and big cup-shaped leaves. And then water lettuce, which is also an ornamental, a popular ornamental. You can still buy those. Both water hyacinth and water lettuce are, although they're on the watch list, they are legal to sell and purchase for ornamental use as long as it's contained on your property. And so if you find these, you know, don't report your neighbor for having them in a container garden. They're not breaking any laws. But if you see them floating along in your lake, then yes, please say something. You know, there's some question about whether they can overwinter, but we're quite certain that in southern Michigan or in areas where there's warm water inputs into our water bodies, that these both hyacinth and lettuce could overwinter and continue to spread. Because even in one season, they can grow very aggressively and cover large areas of waterways. All right, my last little bit is going to focus on rapid response and what to do if you find something. it's important to report it, you know, to your lake association, to MLSA. You can report it to anybody as long as you're getting the words out. But, you know, what we really focus on, you know, the best place to report it is to EGLE, to the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. They have an aquatic nuisance control program. They can point you towards both folks that can help you confirm the identification of the plant that you find. MSU can also help you with that. I can, and my colleagues there with the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, to make sure, you know, if you're questioning something, if you're not sure, you know, send it in, send us some pictures. We'll help you figure it out, because we want to know too. And we'd love to be able to give you the good news that, you know, it's a native plant. You don't need to worry about it. I mentioned the watch list species. There are control resources available. When we find out about plants like, you know, if there is a water hyacinth infestation in a Michigan natural water body, the state of Michigan will go out and send crews to remove it, which is great to know that that's out there. The same thing is true for some of these other invaders. So it makes sense to speak up. If it's an established species in Michigan, then control is really going to be more of a local concern. And so lake associations do have options. You know, you can take on control by yourself, but I really recommend that folks take advantage of their cooperative invasive species management areas, or CISMAs. And I'm going to type that into the chat here. CISMAs are, there's a CISMA for every county in the state. So they're often based at conservation districts. They can help you with local resources and local help to manage invasive species. So they're a great resource. Another thing I'll mention is that it's really important to know about the fact that there's permitting required for most invasive species management activities. If you have you know, a bit of Eurasian milfoil growing by your property and you want to pull it out by hand, you do not need a permit for that. That is, you can just go out and do that. But if you're going to bring a harvester out onto your lake, or if you're going to apply herbicides, even if it's just yourself in front of your own property, permits are needed. So it's best to be safe. Contact the EGLE Aquatic Nuisance Control Program. They can help you know whether you need a permit, what kind of permits are needed, and so forth. And of course, if you're working with any professionals, they will know that there's permits needed and can apply for those permits. All right. There's a lot of different solutions available for control. And I like to mention the long-term stuff first. It's not the easy stuff, but the long-term stuff can really help. And that is really focused on keeping excess nutrients and things out of your lake. If you have invasive plants in your lake, they tend to be nutrient hungry plants. And so keeping runoff from getting into your lake, keeping fertilizers from getting into your lake, that kind of thing. It's old news, but it's still really important news. And it can be hard to implement, but every little bit helps. Biological controls can also be effective long-term. Often that involves bringing in a insect or something that, a native insect that eats the plant. There's some lakes that have had success with controlling Eurasian milfoil with insects. But there's also a lot of short-term options out there. It can be harvesting, either pulling by hand or bringing in a mechanical harvester. Some lakes have some success with actually manipulating lake water levels and drawing them down. That of course requires permits, but drawing down the lake to dry out the nearshore area and kill off if it's a really bad infestation of certain nearshore invasives. You also could apply benthic barriers. That's what that little cartoon is there on the bottom, people laying down some fabric to block the growth of invasive plants on the lake bottom. Again, permits, look into them. They're important to have for these kinds of projects. And of course, herbicides. We're all familiar with spraying for weeds to control invasive species. That's always an option as well. Obviously requires a permit and also requires knowing exactly what plants you're dealing with. And in the case of milfoil, knowing what genetic type of milfoil that you're dealing with. These are all really important things that you can look into. And there's some novel things going in. You may have heard of diver-assisted suction harvesting. That's a kind of hand harvesting where boats with trained divers actually go down with a vacuum hose, basically, and hand remove a plant and gets sent up the vacuum hose to be disposed of. And that's growing in popularity in lakes in Michigan and around the country for a non-chemical way of dealing with invasive plants. As you can imagine, it's labor intensive and expensive to do it, but there has been some success with certain species. I'll put the links to all of these programs in the chat, but I've mentioned the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program. The state of Michigan's invasive species site has a ton of great resources, including a lot of really great videos about invasive species, short videos. I mentioned the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program, educational program, and the upcoming grants program. Ripple for pets and plants in ornamental ponds. And then, of course, we have our Introduction to Lakes class through MSU Extension. If you haven't heard of that, we'll be offering it again next year. It's an online 6-week class where you learn about this stuff and so much more. And I love to put in a plug for that. I think some of the folks, in fact, I know some of the folks on this meeting have gone through that course. So there we go. That's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me at any time with questions that you might have about invasive species or lake management, lake protection, educational programs. If I don't know the answer, I can put you in touch with who does. So I think we do have some time for questions now, right?
Yes, we do. We've got about 15 minutes.
Great.
I have a bunch, but I'm going to hold off. Maybe perhaps it'd be better if you'd stop sharing right now.
Yeah, we'll get that so we can actually all see each other.
And then, you know, if you guys have questions, pipe in. I guess if you're super shy, we'll monitor the chat as well.
I have a question.
Yeah, Lori.
With the lack of the ice and snow over the lake, especially last season, there was so many ice ons and ice offs that we kind of lost count. How does that affect the starry stonewort or in the other plants in the water?
Well, in general, for plants, it can mean a longer growing season, right? The longer period where they're getting sunlight and enough warm enough temperatures to grow, it can allow them to grow later into the season and then start growing again earlier in the spring. We know that certain aquatic invasives grow fine under the ice. Starry stonewort stays pretty green and keeps doing its thing as long as there's some light to be had. And light can get through a lot of ice, actually, especially if there isn't snow on top of it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, they can continue to grow. Curly leaf pondweed is an invasive that grows early in the spring. And so when ice off happens early, it can get going even earlier, but so can the natives. So, right. So there's that too, that might help protect a little bit. But yeah, warmer days and more ice-free days is going to lead to more abundant plant growth. So, and I think some of the invaders can certainly take advantage of that.
Okay.
I see a question about getting new clean, drain, and dry signs for your access. I can help you do that. You can, if you know Kevin Walters with Eagle, you can he's the one who distributes those, but if you don't, just get in touch with me and I'll make sure he gets some to you. I think that it's also important because a lot of places have out of date signage. With the new laws that started in 2019, a lot of the signs, the brown signs, if you have the brown signs or even some of the teal signs that were printed early, the law information on there is actually inaccurate. It's not strong enough. So he has stickers that you can get and apply to the older signs with the updated law information. So you don't have to tear down an old sign, put up a new one. He can provide stickers to get you set up there. And oh, it looks like Matt has some in his office. Great. So DNR in your area has some, and that's probably the best way to go. If you just need a sticker, I can get those to you. I have about 200 in my office. So.
I'll take a turn here. We can just slow me down. I'll try to go in order of importance. I think I saw New Zealand mud snail on one of my dock posts that I was pulling out because I'd never seen something like that. Usually they're full of zebra mussels. Mm-hmm. Is there a native that is similar to that?
Yeah, New Zealand mud snails almost exclusively like streams. So
Okay.
That doesn't mean it's not one, but we do have some small snails that could be easily confused if you're just like looking at small sizes, or it could just be a young snail, right? And so with something like that, it's probably best to be on the safe side and have somebody take a close look at it. And so I can help connect you with somebody. If you collected a shell or something like that, we can get it looked at to find out for sure what you're dealing with.
The best I did was take pictures.
Maybe, you know, depend. There's some broader characteristics we can look at, but if it's one of the ones that's quite similar, a shell might be necessary to know
All
for
right.
sure. They're
There's
just so
more
tiny.
posts in the water. I
Yeah.
will, so capture one and what? Keep it, does it matter what I keep it in?
Nah, I mean, what I usually, it's going to die, right? So it, I usually put them in alcohol. So, you know, if you have some vodka or something that isn't any good, you don't want to, but you know, that'd be a waste, right? So you can also.
You do have some pretty bad vodka.
It'll work. Or, you know, like rubbing alcohol works too.
Okay.
You know, that'll work. Otherwise, I mean, they're pretty small, so you can just kind of keep it in the fridge and it'll be dead by the time it gets to somebody who looks at it, but that doesn't really matter. I had, like I said, I had a bucket of what was concerned to be starry stonewort brought to me yesterday. And, you know, it had been in that person's fridge for quite a while. And it also had a lot of zebra mussels on it. It was pretty gross when I opened it up. And the plants didn't smell that bad, but all those dead zebra mussels, not good. But a few little snails, it shouldn't be too offensive even.
Got it. Will do. I'll pause on my next question. Seems like maybe Mike has a question.
Well, what would be the next step if you identify it? Then what do you do?
Right? Especially in a lake, right? Again, being in a lake, I'm guessing it's not, because they like streams. But you know, how to control them, it's not easy. We have a few rivers in Michigan that have them for sure. The good news is that it seems like in Michigan rivers, they're not overgrowing in the quantities that we're seeing in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has had some really crazy outbreaks, and some western states too, where they just blanket the stream bed. We have them in the Ausable and in the Boardman and the Pere Marquette rivers, and they're there, but happily they haven't taken off to the extent that we've seen in Wisconsin. We're not sure why. And so, you know, no, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, Craig, yep, this is a New Zealand mud snail, do this and they'll be gone. No, but it's something to be aware of for sure. Like if you did happen to have them, we'd want to see how many, how much, and making sure we're not spreading them to someplace new.
Thank you.
Well, I'll take another turn. I think I know what you're going to say, but I kind of want to hear it. So I want to know if I'm full of crap-ish when I'm telling Gravel Acres that part of the problem with the channel that's slow moving, very sheltered, and densely populated around it, the algae blooms could perhaps be prevented in the long term by going towards more natural shorelines. I say this because in theory it should work, but I want to kind of know in practice, am I blowing a little smoke here?
You're not full of crap. Natural shorelines might not eliminate excess algal growth, but they'll sure help, right? Algae just responds so quickly to nutrient additions in a water body. And channels, of course, don't have that flow and wave action and stuff to kind of keep them refreshed. And they're a little more, they just kind of sit and they're still, and algae like that, right? And they also tend to collect sediments. So that sediment has nutrients in it and the algae can benefit from that. But channels also, as you said, tend to be really densely populated. There's usually a lot of homes along there, a lot of lawn, a lot of use going in and out of that channel. And so it'll certainly help. It'll certainly help keep the banks of the channel from eroding. It'll keep runoff from the lawn and even from beyond people's lawn from getting there. It's kind of a last line of defense. And so, you know, don't promise any miracles that they'll have crystal clear water with natural shorelines, but it'll certainly help move them in that direction.
So assume, which it's not a fair assumption, assume most or no one fertilizes. around there, is there still nutrient loading as a result of runoff?
There can be, yeah, because any phosphorus in particular loves to hang on to silt particles and sediment and soil. And we have natural phosphorus in our soils in Michigan anyway. There's plenty of it there. That's why most people don't need to fertilize their lawns in the first place. We just do it because it's been pitched to us for so long that it's important. And so, even if just any plant or soil gets into the water, it's going to bring phosphorus in. Plus, we also have to think about the fact that phosphorus can sit in the bottom of a lake or a channel for a long time. And so even if we do everything we can, if there's been historic excess phosphorus getting into the lake, it's there, it's in the lake. It's not like it's going to disappear. It's going to be there until some plant uses it or something. And so, the lake itself can become a source over time, especially in our heavily populated watersheds. And so, that's why, you hear us say over and over again, like, keep the nutrients out, because once they're in there, it's really hard to move it back, from that highly productive state to a less productive state. Even if you start later on doing everything right, you've already got a lot of phosphorus in your lake, and you're gonna have to deal with those historic effects over time.
Good. Now I got some more ammo now, so thanks.
Oh, good.
I'll take another turn.
You've just been writing down questions all night, haven't you?
I mean, I literally have a huge list of questions here. The next one, you mentioned that starry stonewort has a native relative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could you tell us more about that?
Sure.
Like what the possible confusion would be?
Yeah. So the plant that I was looking at yesterday, that a volunteer brought me, it's one of our CLNP volunteers, is of the genus Nitella. And that's its common name too. Everyone just kind of calls it Nitella. And it kind of looks like starry stonewort without those star bulbils. It may make bulbils, but they'll just be little balls. I know a lot of you are familiar with Cara or muskgrass, that crunchy kind of, that's also a relative of starry stonewort. But it's pretty easy to tell from starry stonewort because it tends to get encrusted with minerals and feel crunchy when we handle it. It also has a musky odor. It never makes stars. And it tends to not grow real thick. It'll be kind of, just kind of a low growth on the lake bed. And it's really a beneficial algae. We really want Cara in our lakes. Nitella is a little more challenging because it is soft, it is branchy, it can get quite thick and tall, but it still has some differences. And one of the key differences is when starry stonewort grows, it'll branch, and the branches will be very uneven. It'll have a really long branch and a really short branch, and then a shorter branch, and then a long branch. Nitella is very orderly. It'll branch, but all the branches will be the same length. They come off at the same point, and then you go to the next node, and there's another set of branches, and they're all kind of the same length. And they might split, but they're going to be, I think, orderly compared to starry stonewort, which always looks like a mess. You pull it up and it's tangled and every piece is a little different length, and it's messy. And so that kind of different growth form makes a difference. And another thing that gave me a clue, because when they first contacted me about this mystery plant that they were worried about might be starry stonewort, they had a big photo of a rake just covered with it, and it was tangled mess. And I was like, oh no, I don't see any stars, but this kind of looks like starry stonewort. But then they sent me an underwater video. They had taken some video, and the first thing I noticed, one, was that it was at 7 meters. So they were below 20 feet deep in the lake. Another thing I noticed is that although there was a lot of it, there was spaces among it. It was growing, but it wasn't really densely packed. When they pulled it up on their rake, it got really dense, but where it was growing, it wasn't really dense. Starry stonewort can grow in deeper water, but it tends to prefer to be up closer to shore, from what I've found, in the little bit shallow water. And it also grows really thick and dense. So when I saw that video and saw that it was, there was spaces for a fish to swim through some of it, it's like, oh, that's a good sign. It's deeper. It's not as dense as what I usually see starry stonewort. I'm thinking it's Nitella, but it was great that they were able to give me an albeit stinky and kind of old sample. I was able to look at it and see that orderly form, that it wasn't all different links and looking really messy. It was an orderly branching pattern and no stars. So I was able to tell them that the good news that it was Nitella and they didn't need to worry about it. It was a beneficial plant.
Great, thanks. Whatever I found was Starry stonewort then. So, thank you.
Yep.
I think that puts us right at our break here. I'm assuming no other questions. No one jumped in. So what we'll do is we'll take a 10-minute break until 7:45 sharp. I want to thank you, Joe, for joining us on our first virtual fall seminar here with Region 3. So truly, truly appreciate you joining us. And this forum has been great just for the Q&A. And also welcome, Matt, Diana. I see you've joined. So right after the break, we'll hop in on our next topic.
Thanks, everybody. I'll probably skedaddle after the break, but I will kind of lurk around and watch the chat and stuff over the next 10 minutes during the break. So if anybody thinks of a late breaking question or wants to chat, and like I said, feel free to reach out to me offline too. I'm here to help. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. We will restart formally at 7:45.
Hey, Joe, are you still there? No?
Yes, I was just muted.
Oh, hey, this is kind of an off the subject question, but you've got the best virtual background I've seen. The picture is super nice, but you're crystal clear. And it's different than all the other times I've been on meetings with you. Did you do something different? Because I've been struggling for a week or two trying to figure out how to get a good, I don't have a green background.
Right, I don't either. I have my same old orange walled office, but I think that Zoom has gotten a little better. But I do have to be careful, like where I'm standing, because if you back up too much, eventually you can disappear. Like it's doing okay right now, but I just have a pretty basic webcam. It's just a Logitech that I have perched on top of my monitor.
I did that too.
Yeah, and that seems to be pretty good. It's pretty basic, inexpensive one, but it seems to work pretty well. And then, I decided I should have a background of a lake for the Lakes Convention a couple weeks ago. So pulled up one of my photos from one of the lakes up here.
So it's a photo that you just loaded in the back. It's not a picture behind you that you really have. Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, I've loaded the latest version of Zoom.
See, there's the truth right there. I'm in my
I remember that. Yeah. But I can't get it to come out as clearly as yours. And well, I'll just keep working on it then.
And I mean, sometimes it depends on the photo too, right? Like I think if it's too busy, it can be, and this is a pretty high resolution photo. So I think that helps. I like this one too, underwater photo that I took not too long ago.
Yeah, because when you move,
plants.
You don't disappear. Well, your hand just
Your hand does, right? Like it tries to guess.
Yeah.
And so the nice thing is with a picture where it's just like a lake is that it's a little more consistent. But see, if I move my hand around or if I try and just show you something, like it gets weird.
Okay.
So
okay.
Sometimes I think it's best just to do what you did and have a nice photo on the wall behind you because you don't have to worry about the weird stuff.
Kathy's going to be on so many of these in the future that I thought we had to do something better. And I remember one time, I know you were giving me a tip when you said about our cat walked behind us and was distracting.
No, I thought he was cute.
Yeah. But, and the foot of my bed being in the back of the screen just doesn't look professional at all.
Right. After a while, you're like, okay, we're going to be doing the Zoom stuff for a while. We might as well.
We gotta. So I thought we'd try to kick it up a notch. So
it's like now Zoom has fun things too. You can put a party hat on, or you can have a pig nose. There's all these. Yeah. So if you want to be really professional, Mike, this is how you do it.
Oh, Joe. Okay, let me ask you a serious one then.
Okay.
This Nitella that you found, do you know
Mhm.
what kind of Nitella it was?
I think it was Nitella flexilis, slender Nitella. It's a pretty common one and it likes deep water.
Yeah,
And you know what I could see in the keys I was looking at, I think that's what it was. But I don't have a microscope here at my house because for some of those you really have to get in there or see their reproductive structures, and this one didn't have any, so it makes it
yeah.
a little harder to know for sure.
See, I was worried sick. I was literally losing sleep over finding some that was in, I probably told you about this before, 25 to 30 feet deep. And it was like every place
Yep,
at
it
that
does.
depth on this lake.
Mm-hmm.
And it fooled Scott Brown and Doug Pullman too, because they
Okay.
came out and they looked at it and they said, whoa, haven't seen it this deep before, but they were fooled for a while. And then we did a little bit more looking and they changed their minds, but it was so hard to tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I had the same thing happen to me up here on Lake Ann several years ago when Starry stonewort was just starting to come out. We found a bunch of Nitella growing deep. And, you know, it was at that point where we were all in panic mode about Starry stonewort. And we still kind of are, but we were still learning how to distinguish it. And, you know, we set some alarms off. And then in the end, they had to say, walk it back and tell their lake association, never mind, it's okay. And
yeah,
like, hey, that's good news. Yeah, we made a mistake, but it's good news that we found out we made this mistake.
absolutely. I know that feeling because I'm trying to figure how do you treat this stuff that's wrapping all the way around the lake at 25 to 30 feet deep.
Yep.
Do you put pipes down with herbicides down there and drag it all the way? And then how much does that cost? I mean, that's why I was losing sleep, but
Sure.
thank God it's still there and it's been there forever
Yeah.
from what I've learned. And, but it just stays there.
Yep.
And our Starry hasn't exploded anyplace ever.
Good.
We found it about 5 years ago now and we treat it every year and it hasn't spread much, and neither has our the milfoil.
Good.
Brian Thum said, just keep your eye on it. It could have been here for 30 or 40 years or
Sure.
who knows how long. And for some reason, it just does. This isn't the right recipe for it to grow in.
Yeah. Well, that's good news, right?
It's a fabulous news.
Yep.
Okay, very last thing I'll get at. This is off. We do have an audit.
Oh, yeah.
Not yet. It'll happen probably when the board okays it in April and the report out in June.
Okay.
But it'll be a full one.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll just make your reporting easier for the MyCore stuff. You won't have to send MSU all your receipts and everything. So it'll be
Sounds
great.
good.
Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Joe.
Sure.
for those of you that are around or nearby, we're going to start very shortly. Looks like most people are returning. So I think we'll get started here. I definitely want to welcome Matt Diana, who is a fisheries biologist with the Michigan DNR, right here out of the Plainwell office, if I'm correct. Had the opportunity to, Missy and I both had the opportunity to meet Matt in person. I can say from personal experience, he is a big advocate of outreach and probably the most interaction I've had with really anyone from the DNR via email or otherwise. So super happy to have you, Matt. I think our set topics are around fisheries management and DNR permitting in general. But again, as with Joe, sky's the limit. Obviously, if it's not Matt's expertise, I'm sure he'll let us know. But don't hesitate to go a little bit off topic, and it's all yours, Matt. Thanks.
Thanks. I do have a short presentation. I apologize for anybody who was at the Inland Lake Conference, because this is going to be pretty similar. But basically, like Craig said, most people are familiar with the DNR from like a law enforcement side of things, conservation officers or wildlife when it comes to hunting, but they aren't really sure how to interact with the fish division and what can homeowners on a lake or a lake association do to work with the DNR, and what can we do for you. So that's kind of the focus of the talk today. I'm going to go through a bunch of topics, but feel free to interrupt me and sidetrack from the topics. I left plenty of time so that we can have a lot of discussion based on whatever we want to do. So feel free to jump in, and I'm going to try to share my screen right now, although now I'm not really seeing an option for it. Oh, there it is. Big bright green button. It isn't quite what I was trying to share.
We got it now.
We can see it.
Is it sharing the talk? Because it looks to me like I'm sharing my Internet Explorer or my Explorer.
No, we can see your deck. If you want to go in slide view or even the page view, whichever's.
Oh, there it goes.
That's
Okay,
perfect.
Good. All right. So I'll jump right in. Michigan's fisheries, we're one of the more diverse states that doesn't have ocean front. We have 150 different fish species here in Michigan, and we're really blessed with diversity of habitat, especially freshwater habitat. There's really nowhere else on earth that's quite as cool, because we have the Great Lakes. We have, over 3,000 miles of shoreline on those. We have 11,000 inland lakes, and I like to always tease that's 1,000 more or 1,000 more than what Minnesota is claiming. So, and then tens of thousands of miles of rivers that are, cold water trout streams to warm water fisheries. So a huge diversity of resources. And what basically all of that resource is managed in a way by the state by holding it in the public trust. That means that even though we have these resources and we manage them as a state, we're doing it on behalf of the people of Michigan. So it really is everybody's resource. And our goal in managing those systems is to accommodate what everybody wants to see. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the DNR. We want to know your opinion. We want to know how you want things to be managed. And we're taking that into account, or at least trying to, when we're making management decisions. But that includes all lakes and all rivers that have an inlet or an outlet, and basically anything that flows into public waters. There's some private lakes that have no inlet or outlet, no public access, and those ones are, you know, completely private, and we tend not to include that in the public trust, and we manage them differently because of that. And then there's waters that we have direct management on, which are those that basically have public access. All streams and rivers are we manage directly, and any site with public access of any type. So, and we do that through our 8 different management units. The way we separate out our management is by watershed. So you can kind of see here, it's groups of watersheds in this particular case, but you know, for our example, in Southwest Michigan, the Southern Lake Michigan Management Unit, we manage the Grand River, the Mactawa River, the Pigeon River, the Kalamazoo River, the Black River, and the St. Joe and the Galeen. So those are all the ones that kind of drain out to the southwest part of Lake Michigan. And we're down here in the green. So just a closer view, just to give you an idea of what our actual staffing is like. We have a unit manager, Brian, who a lot of you probably interacted with. He was a St. Joe biologist for a long time before I took over. Scott Hanchu had traditionally been the one who managed the Grand River. He retired a week ago. So right now we're a little short-handed, and we'll probably, well, hopefully once hiring freezes and things like that open up, we'll have a new biologist for those in the Grand River watershed. And then I manage basically the rest of the southwest part of Michigan. In addition, we have 3 technicians that work with us as well. So we're the ones who kind of do all the work for the southwest part of the state. And our main thing that we work on is basically resource assessment. You know, what is the fishery like in Michigan, and how is it changing through time? And we have a couple different programs we do that with. The biggest program is called our Status and Trends programs, and that's our kind of our monitoring program to let us know how fisheries change through time. So we have both random and fixed sites that we sample in lakes and rivers, so that we can tell if there's been any long-term trends, and we can get a good distribution of what fisheries look like throughout the state. And that's administered at the statewide level, and it's something that we have good, you know, statewide data to look at. And one of the big things that we're concerned with there is just like, how do things change based on global warming or big trends in that might drive ecology in our systems. Then we also do a lot of discretionary work, and that's more looking at a specific management goal. Say we're doing a stocking or something like that. We want to assess how well it's doing, or we have a complaint about the fishery going downhill and we want to get out and take a look at it. That's what our unit managers kind of take. We kind of set those goals based on what we're hearing. And so we do that as well. And then just give you an idea, so statewide, this is old data, 2017, but statewide we did 110 lake surveys and 144 stream surveys in 2017. So it gives you a kind of a ballpark figure of how much work we're doing statewide. And compared to, you know, the figures I showed you earlier with how much water we're managing in the state, you can see it's a pretty small component. So we do the best we can to get where we can, but obviously there's some limitations there. So I'll talk a little bit later on, and we can talk more question-wise how we prioritize our survey and try to get to as many places as we can. But we also administer a creel program that's mostly on the Great Lakes now. We used to have some inland creel where we looked at, and creels are where we basically interview anglers to try to get assessments of how much fishing is going on and how many fish are harvested. Most of our efforts now are focused on the Great Lakes, doing creels both with commercial fisheries and with the charter boat captains and you know, folks that are recreational fishing as well as fishing from the pier heads, getting a good evaluation of how many fish are being harvested a year. And it's really how we manage that fishery, so it's a real important component. And then finally, one of the ways we assess resources is from conversations with anglers. We have some kind of official surveying techniques for that, like postcard surveys, or where anglers can collect data for us. And we also have some informal, which is basically just calling your biologist and talking about the fishery. I mean, sometimes that conversation really is some of the only good information we have about a system. So I really like to promote open communication with folks in the DNR. So when we're going to these lakes and assessing a fish community, there's a few things that we're looking at. I mean, most basically is what fish are here. You know, what fish are in the lake? What do they look like? How many are there? So basically getting an idea of the density, how big those fish are, you know, size-wise. Looking at size structure tells you a lot about fishing, and you know, what the fish available to catch are, and then how those fish are growing. The growth rates really dictate how big fish get. They also tell you a lot about prey resources and how they're doing in the lake. And then finally, is what we're looking at in balance. So basically, do you have the right prey communities? Do you have enough predators? Does that result in a fishery that's balanced? And balanced fisheries are the ones that tend to have the best, that are the best for anglers as well. And then finally, how can we implement management on a lake to try to correct problems that we see or influence catch rates, things like that? There's a number of different things we can do in order to manage fisheries. Try to maintain or return a fishery into balance. One thing we can do is try to enhance or create fisheries. And most of those are done through some very specific management techniques. And we can monitor long-term to look at how things change. You know, if we know something looks poor or it's trending towards poor, we keep an eye on it and make sure that it doesn't change through time, or make sure that doesn't get worse, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We can implement regulations that have very specific reasoning behind, you know, how we're trying to manage that fishery. We can stock fish to either create a fishery or enhance existing fisheries, or we can implement habitat improvement measurements or habitat improvement projects. I've got the different types of regulations that we can use listed here. For different species, they're very specific. Usually you're looking at, you know, is there a harvest related issue here? Are fish being cropped off right at a minimum size limit, and we might have to change the way that's done? Are fish not being protected appropriately? And we can implement a lot of different regulations in order to try to enhance that fishery. And those are all posted in our guide. We've gone away from the printed booklets a little bit. They're still available, but for the most part, we're trying to direct people towards the online guide for a number of reasons. One, they're expensive to print, but the other is if something gets updated through the year, it doesn't get updated in the old print copies. So if you go online, you know you've got the most recent guides that are out there. And then, of course, we have an extensive law enforcement side of the DNR that does do a lot of our kind of monitoring and enforcement of these different regulations. And that's really just to make sure that the management that we're trying to implement is actually engaged. Talk a little bit about stocking, because I know that's something that a lot of people ask from a lake management standpoint. We stock lakes for a number of different reasons. You know, obviously you can create a fishery if you don't have a fish species and you want it. Walleye is a really popular one people ask about. You can create a fishery through stocking. You can use it to balance a fishery. For example, a lot of times you end up with small stunted bluegill populations, too many small fish. They compete too heavily for resources. And because of that, you have poor growth. If you stock a big top end predator, it could enhance a fishery, create a fishery, and they could prey more on those smaller fish, thin them out, and in the long term, benefit the growth rates of those smaller fish. So there's some balance issues that we can look at stocking to solve that issue. Restoration's a real common one. Lake sturgeon's the really good example I like to talk about, you know, and I've got a picture on this slide with our streamside rearing facilities. We have one in New Richmond on the Kalamazoo River. There's a number of other ones throughout the state. And the idea is try to stock fish to promote or to enhance a fish population that's really struggling to reproduce on its own. Supplementing natural recruitment's a good one. If you have a population that's just not reproducing well, you can stock and help that fish population. And then there's a number of other reasons why we stock as well. There's some genetic reasons and to replace fish after a fish kill. Those are a little less common, but they are management techniques we employ. So, when it comes to a private lake or a public lake, and you have a question about, can we stock a lake? What should we be stocking? One of the first conversations we promote you to have is with your fisheries biologist, because we can tell you about the past data that we have, what fish are in there, how it's changed through time, if we have good data for that lake, and help you kind of develop a management plan based on that. Like I said, one of the really important things for managing a fishery is striking that balance between predators and prey. So you want to make sure that if you have a stocking plan or you want to introduce a species, that you have the prey resources for that species. You don't want to stock something and then have it compete heavily with fish that are already there and end up changing growth rates or impacting that fishery as well. So there is definitely some balance issues that you need to talk about. And then, of course, we want disease-free fish. We want fish species that are native to that area, and a number of different factors. And your biologist can help you kind of work through some of those things. And there is a difference between a state plant and a private plant. Obviously, the DNR plants quite a few lakes with fish. It's not as common as it used to be. We used to stock a lot more species, and a lot of our research has shown us that really well reproducing species don't need a lot of stocking. And in fact, stocking can hinder those populations by creating more competition. So there is really some species that do well with stocking and some species that aren't really appropriate to stock through time. And that can be difficult to determine, but because of that, we've shifted to very few species for inland lakes. We really are only stocking walleye. There's some muskie planting that we do, and for the most part, and trout in colder water lakes, but for the most part, that's really all the management we're doing on inland lakes through stocking right now. The rest of our stocking program focuses on Great Lake stocking and trout streams and things like that. So if you have a lake and the other thing I should say is that we tend to focus our efforts on public access lakes. That way, we're putting money into a public resource where people can access it and partake in the fishery. So, but we're willing to give advice and help out with management plans on private lakes or on lakes that have limited public access as well. If that lake is connected through a river channel to any other system, it's part of that public trust, then you do need a permit from DNR Fisheries. It's a free permit. It just helps us ensure that the management's going the way it needs to and that it doesn't conflict with DNR management. It also gives you the insurance that the fish that you receive are disease tested, because we don't want to introduce any viruses or any kind of bacterial diseases into a lake because of a stocking that wasn't done with the right testing done ahead of time. So one other thing that we do, respond to fish kills quite a bit. So if you have a fish kill on your lake, you can call the DNR, you can call Eagle and report it. Usually they turn it over to the DNR. There's a number of different causes for fish kills. Winter kills are a really common one that happens under the ice, basically when low oxygen levels become problematic, and it's real noticeable right after ice out. All of a sudden you'll see some fish, usually on the downwind side of the lake, as they kind of accumulate all the mortality you've had over the winter. There's also some spring fish kills associated with spawning stress. Spawning is really tough on fish. It's stressful. And so if you add any kind of other stress, whether it's big temperature increase or bacterial infections to that population, it can lead to fish kills that time of year pretty commonly. And then in the summer, there's another time period that's really tough on fish, and that's when it gets hot. It gets really hot, especially in shallower lake systems that have a lot of vegetation, and you start to get some decaying and some low oxygen issues. And as well as there's also a lot of fish diseases that happen. I mean, we don't know a lot about fish diseases. There's some that are more studied than others. For the most part, they're naturally occurring, and you do have like outbreaks and depressions in disease, and just the way diseases are moving through these fisheries. So some are more of a concern than others. Some are really problematic, like VHS, which was a big one in walleye populations, whirling disease, which was a big one with trout not too long ago. And now largemouth bass virus is one that we're kind of trying to keep an eye on. So there are some bigger ones, and there's other ones that just pretty much always naturally exist in a population, and then they show up once in a while. Then there's also human causes for fish kills. You know, herbicides can be tough on fish the wrong time of year. You couple it with some of these other really stressful time periods, and it could result in the mortality. It's not very common for herbicides directly to kill fish, but oftentimes they just add to that stress that they're seeing through spawning or something like that. There's also spills, chemical spills, sewage spills. Manure is a big one. Manure runoff from farm fields when it's applied at the wrong time. Other kind of pollutants that causes fish kills, and usually with those we try to assess the damage and try to relate that back to the people who created the spill in the first place. And I also wanted to point out that it's not always fish. It could be amphibians, it could be invertebrates or mussels. So any kind of kill in the water, we basically manage the waters of the state. So, you know, it's not, we call ourselves fish division, but it should be really water or aquatics division or something like that. So, you know, turtles, amphibians, we get some fish, or we get some kill reports for mud puppies, for example. You know, frogs, it's a big one too. So make sure you're talking to your biologist. Let us know, even if it's not a big one, at least we can document it. And if it gets worse, we can go back in and try to make an assessment of what's going on. And there, my next slide's talking about how to report. So you can report just by calling your DNR. There's also an Eyes in the Field website where you can go in and online and submit your report, and that'll just get to the local biologist. If you don't know who to talk to, you can just do it that way. There's also, I have DEQ written here, but they're now currently Eagle. They have a pollution alerting system, which is another, there's a call in and an online version. You can do that for any environmental disaster. Call them or go online and put a report there, and it'll get to the appropriate person. And it doesn't have to be an Eagle person. They'll get it to the appropriate division or the appropriate department as well. And that'll initiate a response. Usually we'll go out and do a site evaluation. And the most important thing is just trying to get an idea what the scale of the kill is, how many fish are being affected, and does it look like it's continuing, and then we can try to look at what the source might be. Oftentimes with fish kills, we get there after the fact, and it can be really tough to figure out what's going on. But we do the best we can to try to at least document what we can. That way, if it continues to happen or gets worse, we can go kind of fall back on that data and get a better idea how to proceed. So I'll kind of breeze through this slide. I just want to say, you know, I'm talking about lakes right now, but we do quite a bit more on those systems. We work really heavily in invasive species control, especially through the permitting process. We comment on all invasive species treatment permits, any kind of chemical permit, things like that. Any kind of work that's done in the water that needs an Eagle permit, we're looking at those, and we're providing input on how to avoid fisheries impacts, fisheries, aquatics impacts, things like that. So oftentimes, even if you're dealing with Eagle, you're also still dealing with DNR, and you may be familiar with that if you've had some lakefront work that you've done or something like that. We do a lot of restoration work on lakes. We're trying to do a little bit more through partnering with the Great Lakes, with the Glacial Lakes program. We also have our fisheries habitat grant and a few other grant options available that you can work with your fish biologist to try to do some habitat work on the lakes, natural shoreline work, things like that. And then if there is any other kind of natural resource impact happening in your system, that's something that we're going to be involved in, you know, trying to assess what's going on, trying to make sure that any kind of impacts can be minimized, and then assisting Eagle with any kind of enforcement that has to happen. And of course, we're trying to do as much outreach as we can. We've got our social media platforms. We try to do meetings like this as much as possible. I've met a lot of you through different outreach activities, and hope to continue to do that. So I'm always available. I'm always, just a phone call away, So, and then those conversations are important because that collaboration really is the only way that we can do significant work on inland lakes. So we just don't have the staff to do a lot of habitat work. So partnering with the Lake Association or partnering with some kind of group to do work is really the best way for us to do it. So we're willing to help, try to bring in the money, try to bring in the expertise, but we definitely rely really heavily on those partnerships. Also, you live on these lakes, you're our eyes and ears. We wouldn't know about fish kills. We wouldn't know about resource impacts or population level declines if we didn't get reports from folks. So, we can't get out, like I said earlier, and survey all of these lakes all the time. We'd like to, we really should. We just don't have the capacity. So those conversations really do become the best way for us to identify problems. Also, we do have quite a bit of resources available to you. If we did a survey on a lake, we should have old reports. Not all of those are available online, but if you talk to your biologist, we can get you anything in our files, old reports, old data sets of what, might have been collected on your lake, old information, and then helping develop a management plan for the future as well. I kind of talked about resource protection, but we are really heavily involved in the whole Eagle permit review process. Our grant programs, I briefly talked about that. We have a number of different grants. I just briefly list them here, but if you're interested in trying to find money for your projects, the best way to do it is just talk to the fish biologist. We'll be real familiar with them, at least be able to put you in touch with somebody else who's been working on those grants in the past. So, Midwest, I mentioned the Glacial Lakes Partnership. We've got the Aquatic Habitat Grant, Dam Management Grant, and our Habitat Improvement Account. Those have been combined into the Fisheries Habitat Grant now to try to streamline it. So you only have to look at one application rather than maybe applying to multiple different funding sources. But that's DNR money to do work on lakes. And our lakes program has really started looking at our habitat programs really started to look at doing more lake work. So we're looking for unique and interesting ways to try to get into doing some lake habitat work. And then, I think this may have been my take home through the whole thing is just, we're available. Contact us. You can contact us a number of different ways. You can contact us through our main lines. We have an email and a phone line that you can call into or send an email to, and they'll divvy out all the different requests to the appropriate biologist. You can attend our public meetings. You can tour one of the facilities we have. Our hatcheries have really good tours. If you haven't been to any of those, and they've got really good fish on display. A lot of them have display ponds. They've got outreach people there to do these types of tours. So I really recommend you going to those if you haven't had a chance. And then of course, we've got our weekly fishing reports that you can keep an eye on as well. And to end the talk, I have my contact information there. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, that's my direct cell phone line now and my direct email line. We try to respond in a couple days at the most to all those things. We're not always available because we're doing field work or something like that, but we try not to let anybody hang on hold for too long. So reach out, even if it's a simple question or a simple suggestion or a simple idea to do a work project. I'm always available and always wanting to have these conversations. I kind of regret that I haven't had the chance to kind of reach out to each lake that I manage individually, but try to take advantage of those times when they come up in order to collaborate. So I think I kind of rushed through those. Apologize for that, but if that brought up any questions or any kind of conversation, I'm all ears. So I don't know how much time we have.
We still have at least 15 minutes for questions.
Great.
Matt, thank you for that. I would suggest you stop sharing and then we'll go full screen on folks. without a surprise, I have a lot of questions, but I'll hold on those.
Matt, can you explain in a little more depth the statewide program of assessing lakes? How often that happens and per lake and to what depth?
Sure. Yeah. So the lake program is mostly what we call random sampling. So it basically is a list of all the lakes in the state divvied out by size. So we have a large, medium, and small. And we're assigned to do basically one of each of those a year. So that's about 3 lakes in our standardized sampling per unit. Some can do a little more, some less, depending on how it aligns with their discretionary work. So if they happen to need to get into a lake that comes up randomly, then it frees up time for them to do something else as well. So yeah, that's the standardized program. And then, like I said, we try to get in on our discretionary program to the lakes that we have very specific management questions on.
So the first one is one that you do or someone else from the state does?
We do it. So it's all done by the local management unit.
I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's unfortunate because sometimes the lakes are private lakes or small lakes that don't have a lot of real issues, and so it takes away from some of the ones we really want to get to, but it helps us watch basically all the lakes in the state in a very structured survey program that we can therefore use to ask statewide questions. And it's been really valuable looking at things like how has an invasive species changed the fisheries in the state, or how's a threatened or endangered species distribution change. So that's kind of how we use that statewide database.
Good. But if Region 3 has 1/6 of the lakes in the state, we've got close to 2,000 lakes, yeah. And if there's 3 biologists, you each cover 3 a year. What's that? That's 9 per year out of 1,500 or 2,000. You've got a lifetime of work and then some in front of you.
Yep. Yeah. We figured we would run through our random set of the lakes, the suite that we have in 20 years. Our Northern Lake Huron program's already run through their set 3 times. So there's some discrepancies based on lake densities and things like that. But so that's why we have the discretionary program, so we can get into lakes that we're just not going to get to randomly. But there is the real world issue that we're just not going to be able to sample them in all the lakes in our region in any kind of repeated and really thorough manner. So it's a problem, and that's why I'm stressing, communication with the biologist is a really important factor, because we're just not getting the surveys done that we need to. Just kind of a reality of our program, unfortunately.
Very good. Thank you.
Let me build on that, Paul, if I might. So related to that, Matt, I mean, I guess what as lake associations can we do either on a basic level or even perhaps a more advanced level? What would you, if you had to pick the types of things we would be doing, what would those be?
Well, I've worked with a lot of lake associations to collect data. And a good example would be Gull Lake. We thought we had some issues with pike. Basically, the size structure seemed to be decreasing. People complained that they weren't catching big fish. So partnered with quite a few anglers to try to get spine samples. And one of the ways we age fish is we take a spine, you cross section it like you would a tree, basically, and you can tell how old a fish is and compare that to its size and get a good idea of what its annual growth rate is. So that's a program where we were able to do, I think, a relatively thorough evaluation of pike growth just by partnering with the local anglers. And we didn't have to do any surveying. We had to process some samples, but saved us a lot of time from having to run a real annual. And when we tried doing more thorough netting surveys on Gull Lake in the past, we've actually had trouble getting enough fish just because of the kind of complexity of netting a really clear water system. So yeah, angler type data is something that we can collect. That's probably the easiest one that turns directly into fish data. But even things like being involved in the some of the like the mycore system or something like that, we use that Secchi disc data. We use those temperature and oxygen profiles to understand a lot about what the potential for a fishery is, especially if we're talking about something like a cold water, cool water fishery or stocking walleye or something like that. Understanding the depth and temperature and dissolved oxygen profile can be really integral into making a management recommendation. So any kind of data collection that a lake association can do is really valuable. We definitely use that stuff, and I really appreciate that program is going to be viable again, because it was a shame to see it on the chopping block for a little bit there.
You automatically get that information from MyCore on all of your lakes?
No, it doesn't come straight to us, but we can easily access it. So if I'm going to write, even if we've done a thorough survey on a lake, I'll still go try to pull as much data as I can from other places, just because I know that we're not doing enough. So any kind of data that's available through those programs is really valuable. But sometimes you got to look for it. Sometimes we cooperate straight with the organization itself. But yeah, it's available to us. We just have to reach out and look for it.
Well, do you want us to send it to you every year?
Especially if you notice something that's concerning. If you've been taking samples for a long time and you think something's changing, that's a time where I can start digging into that data and look at it and getting a better idea what might be a problem.
Well, Matt, with the MyCore data, that's real easy for you to get online just with a few clicks.
Yep.
And although we won't have it for this year, at least for a little while, then we'll have a little bit more data to enter in for 2020. But after that, it's going to start back up again. So, and the volunteers will come right back again. I just know it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't need to keep my own database. I can just pull it off of those kind of interfaces. That's one reason that program is so awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else that's listening in, if you haven't looked at that database, you just go to MyCore, and it takes a little bit of digging the first time you go through it, but it's all right there. You can compare your lake to a lot of different other lakes, which is kind of interesting. If if you're confined at home doing nothing, that might be something to help pass your time.
Well, I'm not shy. Let's get a bit more spicy here, Matt. How about when do you have pause or concerns about herbicide applications on lakes as it pertains to your role with fisheries management?
Yeah, it is a concern, and we don't really understand how much yet. I think we're learning a lot as we apply more and more chemicals and as it becomes more of a regular practice. The thing that concerns me the most is when native vegetation is being targeted. And of course, we understand the need for certain things to enhance recreation. And as a homeowner on the lake, we understand the need to be able to access the lake and things like that. So, there are very specific restrictions on treating native vegetation over a certain amount on certain lake systems. But, when it comes to wetland areas and when it comes to known spawning or refuge areas for juvenile fish, native vegetation is really critical. And the one component that I think gets overlooked a lot is it's it's extremely important for resistance to invasive species. And so if you're treating native vegetation, you're leaving a gap or a niche for invasive species to come in. So especially with Starry stonewort, that's one that recolonizes faster than a lot of other native species. And because of that, you treat your native veg, invasives come in, now you've got another problem, and you have one that's harder to treat as well. So that's one that we really kind of are nervous about. When we see Starry stonewort and we see like a lake-wide treatment report, proposal, something like Floridone or Sonar, I think it's a trade name, that's one that raises a big red flag for us, because you're just gonna, it's marketed as a chemical that doesn't impact native species, but it's just not true. And so yeah, that anytime native species are being targeted is the big one. Milfoil is a tough one. As Joe was saying, it's pretty naturalized right now, unfortunately. It's in almost every system, and it does provide some fish habitat. And so we have a lot of back and forth conversation over, is it better to treat on large scale, or is it something that we should just deal with if it's not too big of a problem? And I don't think we've really come to terms with what the answer is there, but I guess what I would suggest is moderation in anything is good. So, you need some kind of vegetation in order to promote juvenile fish growth and survival. And so there might be some times where heavily treating milfoil is not exactly the best strategy, but it's lake by lake specific. I couldn't give a overarching guideline that would help kind of categorize whether that's a good idea or not, but we're definitely worried about the long-term impacts to macroinvertebrate communities, especially from copper treatments. We're looking at copper as being a real, it's really hard on fish spawning, and so that's one that we're really looking at maybe changing some of the regulations on. We've got a work group with Eagle right now, between DNR and Eagle, to try to mine a lot of the data that we collect to figure out exactly what we might be seeing there. We don't want to unfairly put restrictions on things if it's not necessary, but there's a lot of red flags that makes us think that some of the chemical applications we've been doing in the past are just a little too aggressive.
Well, let me press you a little bit there. I was kind of trying to say what the lesser of two evils was. It
Sure.
sounds like you have concerns with the systemic Sonar, which many of us use because it over targets. But then I was thinking, oh, well, does that push me to prefer spot treatments? Typically, copper sulfate is what is used for spot treatments, but you have concerns with that as well. Which, I suppose, would you push us a certain direction? Like, I'd prefer spot treatments over lake-wide, or?
Yeah, it can depend on the community of plants that you have. So I will say that my dislike for Sonar is lightened up a little bit, because Eagles provided us with some conflicting data. So in some cases, you'll see a big shift towards Cara when you use Sonar. It's a native vegetation, and if you look at some of the studies that initially talked about native species not being targeted by Sonar, you see a big shift towards Cara in a lot of those. And Cara is not it's still a good plant. It's a native plant, but you don't want your entire plant community to be composed of Cara. It's good to have diversity.
Wait, it targets Cara? Is that
Well,
wild
it's the other way
celery?
around. Cara is the same way. It's very similar to Starry stonewort in its recolonization ability. So oftentimes, if you knock down native vegetation, even if it's temporary, Cara can come sweep in and take over a little bit.
Is Cara wild celery? Is that the one with the spaghetti?
No, Cara's it's the macroalgae, the one that's kind of grainy when it's
Never
got
mind.
this into it. So, and it's, like I
Sorry.
said, it's not a bad thing. It's just too much of any plant is a bad thing. You want diversity is the goal. So some of the Floridone treatments have shown some pretty good success. I think evaluating it and getting an idea what's happening is really important. If you look at a Floridone treatment after 3 years and you're shifting towards a species monoculture of Cara, I'd recommend against doing a second round of Sonar, for example. So I think a lot of it just has to do with monitoring and making active decisions based on how things are going.
So would you be able, if like we asked, the Gravel Lake Association came in and said, hey, Matt, this is what's on the table. What do you think?
Yep.
Is that a way we could use you?
Yep, for sure. And my expertise isn't exactly focused on invasive plants. And so there's other experts like Joe who are great resources as well. But I am more than happy to give you a fish division opinion on a management plan, talk through options, and try to steer away from some of the mistakes that we see from fish, or at least let you understand what might be the fisheries impacts. So I mentioned copper inshore. We can look at where it's going to be applied. Is it an important spawning ground? The problem with copper is it's not going to kill fish necessarily, but it's an irritant and it chases them off of it wherever they are. So if you spray copper over a spawning bluegill colony, they leave and their nest fails. So we see some recruitment impacts related to the timing of copper treatment. And so we've been working on certain lakes. We'll even restrict it if there's a really heavy copper application planned during the spawning period. We'll push it back. For example, Long and Palmer Lake in the Colon area, they proposed a really heavy copper treatment to deal with the big algae problem there. And we were real concerned that we could have a lake-wide recruitment failure because of the timing. So it's one of the ones that we've been talking a lot about. And that was abnormal because the copper treatment was so large compared to normal. It was higher. It was the largest copper treatment Michigan's ever permitted. So there's extenuating circumstances, and like I said, every single lake's got its own issues, and I'm more than happy to talk through what we're seeing, what my opinion is. And I'm in no way does it mean that you have to follow our recommendation, but it's at least one more opinion that you could weigh into your decision making.
I have a question.
Sure.
With the this has to do with natural fish kills and actually human cause too, but with the inconsistency in the weather patterns, with the hot summer we had, the not real cold winter that we had, are you getting more fish kills because of that?
This year was a bad one, yeah. Especially that spawning stress. We had a real warm May and June, at least a warm stretch in there, if I remember right. And it happened right when bluegill and bass were getting on the nests. And
when's that? When does that happen?
May and June.
May and June.
Yep. It depends on the lake a little bit. It's obviously temperature driven, but May and June tends to be when the water temperature gets about right for those colonies to start forming. Bass usually start earlier than bluegill, and if you have crappie, they start even earlier than that. So when a real bad warm up temp happens right during spawning, sometimes that causes a lot of stress. And then, like I said, it's hard for us to pin a mortality event to one particular thing. But if you have a lot of stress and then you have some other stressful characteristic that's happening in the lake at the same time, that's when you tend to have the perfect storm that causes fish mortality.
Or if your lake is pretty shallow, if you have a shallow lake.
Yep, it heats up quicker, or you might see mortality in one of the big large bays. If something happened, like you had wind that forced a lot of fish into a poor area, or warm water from a lake moved because of the wind at a certain time of year, wind can really cause more fish mortality than people realize.
We have a lot of people that, of course, blame it on the herbicide treatments. And
yeah, sure.
I'm always looking for a verbiage to kind of battle that.
Yep.
Not that it doesn't affect it, but I think primarily it's because of natural kills.
Yeah, we very rarely can say a herbicide killed fish, and it's usually because a bacteria killed fish. And and I'll say the way that we see mortality associated with herbicides is usually when they're applied inappropriately, and there's a lot of things put in place to keep you from killing fish during treatments. But if a really warm day or warm up happens like we talked about during the spawning, and there's a bacteria outbreak going on already, that herbicide, even though it normally wouldn't cause any mortality, might be the thing that kicks it over the edge.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean the herbicide killed the fish or caused the fish. You could have had a fish killed 2 days later if the herbicide wasn't applied,
Mhm.
but it was one of the factors that added to the stress. And it's really hard to explain that to someone who wants to pinpoint what the stress is coming from, you know, or where the kill is coming from. It's stress got too high. There's a ton of things that stress fish out. That might just be one of them that added to it a little bit. You know, if it's a copper treatment on top of spawning fish that are really stressed out, then it probably led to it more than if it was a less harmful or a less irritating or stressful chemical applied in a really spot treatment type of manner. So when you do have fish kills that are associated with herbicide treatment, it's almost always because you're treating really large areas and it affected the dissolved oxygen in the lake. Most treatments nowadays most treatment recommended rates are done in a way to prevent that from happening. So it's really tough unless someone's going outside of the label or outside of their permit to cause a huge fish kill just from herbicide treatments alone. I apologize for not having a straightforward answer there. Fish kills are really complicated, and we just don't have the forensic ability to go in. The worst problem is that we can't look at pathogens in a dead fish, because as soon as they die, they get swarmed with parasites and bacteria and things like that. So we need to find one that's about to die in order to do the appropriate pathology work on them. So if we have a lethargic looking fish and an ongoing fish kill, we can go out and collect them and then go get disease testing done on them and have a better idea what's going on. But dead fish just don't work for that, unfortunately. It's very hard to go back and find dying fish. Usually we're there a day or so after the fish kill actually occurred.
Matt, would it, if we were to find fish in that state, would we collect them and freeze them?
That can work. Ideally, what we would do is exactly that: freeze them quick. Yeah, because if they're that way, and even if they're fresh dead, that works the same way. It's just very hard to find fresh dead fish. You know how gross they are when they die. It happens pretty quick, and so it's easily demonstrated how nasty other parasites coming in or other bacteria and whatnot coming in can cause a problem. But yeah, if you find lethargic fish and they're frozen, we can process those. And we have a lab. We work through the Michigan State. We have a pathology lab there that does all the testing for the state of Michigan. They're really thorough and they're really good. So when we do have the appropriate fish, we can easily get real good quality results from them. Or if it's ongoing, we can come out and shock or something like that and try to get our hands on as many fish as possible. We had to do that this year with an ongoing kill on Driscoll Lake, where they had, it turned out to be a largemouth bass virus issue and columnaris, which is a bacteria. But, you know, we were able to get out there, collect fish as the kill was ongoing and get the fish we needed for pathology work.
Did you say Bristol Lake?
It's Driscoll, or Driscoll, I mean. It's over, it's by...
south of Lawton or Marcellus.
Yeah, it's right off
Jones.
Yep. The small lake, but they've had a lot of problems with microcystis over the last few years, and this year was really bad for it. And thought it might be related to that, but it turned out they also had some disease issues in the fish community going on. So.
Okay, great. Other questions? We're a bit over time, but I don't want to stop anybody since we're having a good discussion here.
Matt, is there, are there any kind of restrictions on riparians killing or intentionally damaging native vegetation, a la these, radius rollers people put at the bottom of the lake?
Yeah, mechanical there's some permitting, like Joe was saying, involved with a lot of things. I'm not really familiar with the rollers, but most mechanical style management of weeds, it's not permitted unless it damages or changes the bottom substrate somehow. So I think that I'm not sure about those, to be honest with you, what the permitting status of them is. I mean, we're worried about things like that because it could cause impacts to macroinvertebrate populations, native vegetation, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean it's regulated. It doesn't mean that that the concern's big enough on a small scale that we would try to intervene or anything like that. So.
Well, they commonly advertise in the riparian. I haven't noticed lately, but
yeah,
if killing of natural vegetation is something that we don't support, I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like I don't support any weed management at all. I mean, there's limitations on weed management on private property for recreation, and those guidelines are set to leave some vegetation. So if you want to have a beach, or if you want to have better access to a dock and boating area, and you need to deal with the vegetation around that, that's not the kind of issue. I mean, obviously that's your riparian right. It's the wetland fringe that's on the outside edge there that really has nothing to do with your lake access, but leaving a little bit of it there provide some of the habitat that maybe you're losing in another spot. So every little bit counts. I guess what we just say is don't go above and beyond if you don't have to. Just try to maintain what you can. It's same thing with the native shorelines program. Obviously you need access to the lake, but if you can keep a certain area that's got more native vegetation or has more of a natural wetland fringe edge to the littoral zone, it promotes quite a bit of habitat.
Thank you.
Yeah, we especially talk about that when it comes to turtle populations because they really struggle with shoreline blockage. They need to move from the littoral area, from the lake shore into the upland in order to lay eggs, and even something like a 6-inch barrier can block access to their, where their nesting grounds. So something we talk about, even a little bit of good access might be enough to really keep that population going. Turtles really are imperiled right now. It's kind of sad. They're such a long-lived species. Even the little guys are 20, 30 years old, and doesn't take much to really knock down their population.
Great. Other questions? I think we're well over time, but fantastic discussion. Matt, I just really want to say thank you.
Yeah.
For joining us. I personally love this intimate setting here where we can just kind of fire off all of our specific questions. It far beats a broad seminar, so thanks. With that, I think I'm just going to close it up here. Really appreciate everybody's questions and comments and participation. Matt, thank you again for joining us this evening. And for everybody else, I'll be sending out an email to participants, hopefully to just get some feedback, constructive or whatever, so we can continue to improve and decide how this forum evolves. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Craig. That was great, Matt. You were awesome. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.